We're going to start off with where and what did you study?
Okay, well, I started off down in Melbourne at RMIT, and I studied in the School of the Built Environment there. I studied landscape architecture.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we started off with interior design and architecture, landscape, building all together. And so we shared the first year as a foundation, and then we segregated off into our disciplines.
Yeah.
And as part of that, I went and studied for a year in Japan.
Did you? Oh my gosh.
Which was fantastic.
And do you speak the language?
Well, I chose Japan because it was so foreign to me, and I thought, because we were offered the opportunity to go to Holland or to America or Japan, they had relationships with those institutions, and I thought, I want to go to the one that's the most different to the culture that I know, and will challenge me the most. And so Japan was obviously that. And so I ended up at the Osaka Furitsu Daigaku.
Wow.
So I got to Japan, and I spent the first 3 months living with a family down in Osaka who had a little family temple. So the grandmother and the father were priests, and they would do weddings, funerals, anything for people.
Yeah.
And it was really like a family business. And then after 3 months, I moved up to Kyoto to be, I suppose, in a less suburban sort of environment, and to be in a more sort of beautiful Japanesey kind of environment, close to incredible gardens and landscapes and stuff like that. So I moved up there, and then about halfway through my year, my living arrangements changed. I went off on a little motorbike holiday with a friend of mine. She understood the value of craft and traditional arts and crafts. And so she introduced me to the minge and museums and, so when we went off on our little motorcycle holiday in the middle of that year, I came back after that, and the English woman I'd been sharing a little apartment with had moved, and, because she wanted to have relationships, and it was a bit hard for her to do that in our little shared space.
Yeah.
And so then I needed to find somewhere, and it sort of serendipitously unfolded that I ended up living in a little Zen Buddhist temple for the next 6 months, which was fantastic. It was the most wonderful opportunity. It was completely life-changing. Yeah, so it was awesome. I don't know if you've been to Kyoto. It was a temple up in the northern part of the city called Daitokuji. So there's 22 temples inside that complex.
Yeah. And
we were in the littlest one, which had been restored by an American Zen nun, Ruth Fuller Sasaki. So it had an interesting background because it had people like Allen Ginsberg and Gary Schneider, these sort of beat poet type people, lived there for a while. And Ginsberg actually came and read Howl, or performed his poem Howl when I was there. So it was an amazing time. It was amazing. And I just used to ride around the city on my bicycle everywhere, and I did a little bit of English teaching, and I did a lot of sketching and photography, and just was so lucky to have that incredible time. And then came home and finished my landscape architecture degree and started working in landscape architecture.
Yeah.
And so I did that for, I don't know, maybe 4 years or so. And eventually I decided that I wanted to go to Mittagong, to the Sturt School for Wood, and really throw myself into learning how to do that really well. And it was a crazy decision. It wasn't a financially sensible thing to do. But as a kid growing up, I'd often gone to that part of the world because my grandmother's farm was near there, and she would take me there, and we'd have a look through the workshops and the gallery, and it was just a beautiful environment. Lovely big trees and lovely gardens, and so there was a lot of history there, and she'd been to school there as a girl, so there was a strong family connection with the place. And anyway, so I thought, doesn't matter that it's, not a sensible financial thing to do. Because I felt that the firm I was working for in Melbourne, it was the second job I had. It was a big commercial practice, and I was doing projects which didn't sit well with me ethically.
Yeah.
I felt like I was selling my soul to the devil.
Oh, I hear that all the time with people in a creative street. It's like, oh, this is not what I thought I'd be doing.
So, I was doing things like sand mining lease extension applications and McDonald's car parks, and the worst one was being asked to work on the development of 500 houses on this block of land next to the Latrobe Uni Wildlife Reserve. It was Mental Health Authority land, but I'd been working as a student. My final project was on this block of land, working with a community action group that was trying to stop this development.
Whoa!
And I went to some planning committee with them, with fantastic models I'd made and drawings, and we added to this report, and so I was right there involved with them. And then here I was working for the other side, trying to develop it, and I just couldn't live with that. It was just too awful.
Yeah.
So,
such a kind of ethical crux point.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, no money, doesn't matter, I'll wait tables,
Yeah.
So I left and I went off to study furniture making properly. And it was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was immersive. We could be in there 24/7 if we wanted to. We had a great teacher who had a good sense of design as well as good making skills and background. And he taught me so much. He was a wonderful teacher. After studying down there were two other graduates and I who were talking about setting up a workshop.
Okay.
And so we came up to Sydney and we found we looked for a while, and while we were looking, I had a commission from Rena Bernabé, actually, who teaches in industrial design at main campus. So I was making a whole lot of stuff for her down at Mittagong in the bottom workshop. And anyway, then we found our space in St. Peter's where we set up Splinter Workshop. So there were three of us initially: Phil Boddington, Georgina Lidgettwood and myself. And then we got the space and, we had to sort of transform it a bit, bring in three-phase power and, make it functional. We had a separate machine area with a big firewall door, and then we had a space where we could all have individual spaces. And ultimately we grew to about 10 people and everyone would have a bay. It was a beautiful old paint factory building, and so quite soon after we signed the lease, two more graduates from Sturt joined us, Mari Normoyle and Mark Delaney, gorgeous people. And we just had this beautiful group of like-minded people working together, and we were working as individual designer makers, but because we had this little community, we could sit at the lunch table and problem solve or bounce ideas around, or have you thought about doing it this way, or can you help me on the other end of this board, over the table saw, So we had that fantastic network, and then that grew to about 10 people, over time. And it was interesting, as time went on, how the the chemistry would either work or not work depending on the complement of people.
Totally.
And it's a difficult way to make a living, because I didn't want to end up doing a lot of melamine kitchens and things like that. I wanted to make beautiful objects for people largely out of timber, but I used to use a bit of stainless steel or glass or fabric or other patinated brass, whatever, all sorts of different materials. And we would work for architects or interior designers or just directly with clients. And then sometimes we would organise an exhibition, and so then we'd all have to work towards that exhibition. It involved some sort of curation skills and project management skills and group management skills. Yeah, so that was always exciting to have something like that to work for, because usually when you're just working, you know, on commissions for people, that's what you get bogged down with, and you don't make time to develop new work of your own necessarily. Like, you know, Rachel's project was amazing, you know, to be able to have the headspace and time and money to work on a project like that is pretty rare.
Completely.
Yeah, so
Impressive.
every now and then we would have one of these exhibitions. Sometimes we would get grants from NAVA or from New South Wales Ministry for the Arts. You know, we had one in the city through Grace Brothers. We had one down at Canberra at the ANU. We had our biggest one at the Tin Sheds Gallery at Sydney Uni, which was a good one. And, you know, by that time I had a lot of experience installing exhibitions at the MCA too, because I used to be on the install team there. So, you know, my practice intermittently would be punctuated by going in there and working on a turnaround, which was so great. Yeah, it was one of the best, you know, jobs sort of on the side of a practice that you could have. It was like going to art school and never having to do any assignments, but working with phenomenal artists, being with their work and their stories long enough to really learn about them, not just passing through for an hour and a half or something on a visit to the gallery. So that was hugely good fun, and the team who worked in there were all really creative, talented souls. So I've got so many friends from that time who are still great friends, and, you know, that was a really wonderful place to work. And I would also work here. You know, Karina Clark got me in teaching here because she wanted someone with practical skills and a design education, but with making skills, you know.
Makers are very important.
Yeah, rather than, you know, just people with PhDs. She felt like it was really important to have people with practical skills. So I would do my practice. Every now and then I'd come in here and teach, and then every now and then I'd be at the MCA doing a turnaround. And while I was at STERT, I was introduced to the little studio down there by Tom, and he introduced me to, you know, the monoblock lighting system and all of that for documenting work.
Yeah, right.
So once I was in the workshop at Splinter, because I'd always done photography from my, you know, even when I was a kid, and then at RMIT, and then at STERT I was doing it. I got myself a set of lights, and I was, you know, documenting my work and other colleagues' work. And then people here started to ask me to document their work, and then that sort of turned into some student work, and then work for the magazine. And so it sort of grew organically, like that. And then Henry, you know, Henry, my son's 12. So just before he was born, when I was pregnant, I sort of stepped out of Splinter because I wanted to grow a healthy baby.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think studying photography kind of developed and kind of grew your practice more?
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think even though I got a great technical education there, I think I was really craving an art school.
Yeah, right. You want some more conceptually kind of driven as opposed to practical.
Yeah. So sometimes I get myself in trouble a little bit there because I wanted to talk about ideas, and so I would do quite a lot of documentation of artists' work or of exhibitions in galleries. But it started to also, my architectural photography started to grow. And I was doing courses up at the ACP as well, and lighting courses and architectural photography courses and stuff like that. So I was always growing my knowledge there. And so then, you know, the architectural side of things started to grow more. So I was teaching here, doing architectural photography, and really enjoying working with students.
Yeah.
Because there's such a pleasure in dealing with these amazing ideas students bring to you, and the challenge of trying to get each of those projects, you know, to a point of fruition.
Yeah.
Is really exciting.
Nurturing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so great. It's such a challenge, and it's such a pleasure. and working with students who are really keen. And
so important teaching. I feel like to be an educator, it's like very, very, very.
yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, like flipping that around from having learning and kind of being taught, and then flipping that and sharing your own.
It's so funny though. Like most things I do end up happening inadvertently. Like I'm not a very good planner, and so I sort of fall into things.
What materials and technology interest you the most now?
I suppose I have a soft spot for timber, obviously, because that's where I started out. And I would say, that's pretty much thanks to my grandmother, who introduced me to, she collected beautiful furniture. She was a huge influence on me in her interest in the handmade.
Our next question was, has social media impacted your practice and being a viable
for sure,
platform?
absolutely. Because I left for a little while with Henry, and I had a young baby to look after. I felt a little bit isolated, and it was really through my teaching here, but also through social media, getting back in touch with some of my colleagues and friends, like Blue Cheek, Roy Shack up in Brisbane, and people like that, sharing their knowledge and all of that kind of stuff, reminding me what I do know and what I can share, and sort of rebuilding.
Okay.
Yeah, we were going to talk about intellectual property kind of considerations.
Yeah. So
the issues you've noticed.
That's been interesting, and I've never had to write a letter to anyone. Sometimes you have to get a lawyer's letter written, and sometimes, there might be a request for the object to be removed, or
To ask is like, could you explain to us your professional philosophy, and then regarding sustainability and design, because I feel like that's maybe a major part of.
Yeah, well, look, it's so important. Yes, in terms of resource use, we have to be so mindful about how we use resources and responsible, and we have a responsibility as designer makers to educate the people we're working with about those sorts of things. Because it's not just like going into a fashion shop and saying, I'll have one in this colour and one in that colour and one in this colour. Like, that has major implications, and I suppose it does if you know fashion too.
Yeah, that's another whole.
But timber as a resource is, super valuable and precious. But then it's also changing with different technologies available. So we've got CNC routing and laser cutting and laser etching and all of these other things which are freeing up design in a lot of ways, and sort of silly not to utilize those technologies unless there's a real reason why something has to be done, whether it's a theoretical or a philosophical or ethical sort of choice, that you might embark upon a project and only use traditional techniques. But it sort of makes sense to use what's appropriate, where it's appropriate, and to have the intelligence and the maturity as a designer to know when to apply what technique or what skills. We need stuff which makes us think, and we need stuff that makes us feel, and we need stuff that makes our souls sing, and that the spirit, it's about the spirit, a lot of it, I think. And if I'm making, I don't want to be making stuff that's going to be thrown out in 2 or 3 years' time, and the person that I'm making for doesn't want to throw it out in 2 or 3 years' time because they're spending good money on it. We're making something really beautiful together. It's a co-creative process, and in a way, I suppose money's important, and I'm not a good example about money management, but in a way I'd love to be in a position where I just make things for people and we didn't even talk about money, and money didn't even have to exchange hands, because I get such satisfaction from someone loving something that I've made, that's almost enough in itself.
What project has given you the most satisfaction then? And the opposite maybe has
Well,
been
recently
the most
it would be
challenging?
that book, you know, the book that I did work on for Durback Block Jaggers. Like, that was hugely satisfying. And I worked on that over a period of years, in fact, you know, and I really appreciated the fact that, I mean, partly that they liked the way I saw, and I think my design background was really important in what I captured or what I generated for them. But they had quotes from Chinese printers, you know, which they're about to go with, and then they got one from this Japanese printing house, and it was much more expensive, but they decided to print half as many and go with the Japanese one because the actual object that was going to be produced was so different.
Yeah.
You know, in a sensual, experiential way, this beautiful slipcase and the quality of the binding and the quality of the paper and the quality of the print all just was a completely different thing from this Japanese printer than it was from the Chinese. And so it wasn't just about numbers and, you know, sales and, you know, oh yeah, that'll do. It was about creating the perfect object.